Our society seems to view shyness as a big problem, especially when it's in children. So, a child who is not that keen on, performing for strangers when they visit the home, or a child who is not that comfortable giving other people hugs and kisses, or a child who is not, very thrilled about the possibility of interacting with new people, a child who tries to spend more time with their parent than interacting with other people at a party or on a playground. All these things, we tend to see it as a big problem, right? And there are many parents who feel like, oh, my child is shy, there is something wrong with them. Shyness is a problem, so it has to be addressed and it has to be changed. And this happens because people seem to think that a child who is shy cannot be confident. Now, that is where we need to understand, like, where does your child's shyness come from? Okay, so the word that we use, shyness, we use it to mean a child who is not that keen on interacting with other people, right? So this is a child who may be, quite open, quite frank at home. If they're comfortable, they'll talk, they'll interact with people who are very close to them. But when it comes to interacting with other people outside the family or outside the child's comfort zone, they don't seem that keen on doing it, right? But then the thing is, it doesn't always come from lack of confidence. Sometimes a child who is very confident can also be shy. So how do we understand if a child is, actually underconfident, or if they're just cautious? So this is what we need to understand. Some children, when they meet new people, they don't have that temperament where, they'll just forget everything and enjoy their time with that new person, right? Their temperament tells them to be careful. So these are the children who will, stand on the sidelines. They will first observe what this other person is like. What does this other person, what is their behavior like? What are the things that this other person likes or dislikes? So this child will observe all of this. And then if the child feels like, oh yeah, this is an interesting person, or this seems like a nice person, I want to talk to them. If the child feels so, they'll talk or they'll interact with that person. If the child feels like, oh, this is a very strange person, or I don't particularly feel comfortable with the way this person behaves, or maybe this person has too much energy and I'm not in the mood to interact with that level of energy, then the child might just withdraw. The child might go and sit next to the parent and not want to interact with that other person. This does not mean that the child is underconfident. It just means that the child does not find that person interesting enough or safe enough to interact with. Okay, in some cases what happens is the child is quite confident. The child can talk to anyone, that is not a problem. But then the child is really tired, or they have like a lower threshold for like overstimulation. So they get overstimulated very quickly. So when they get overstimulated, they don't want to talk to anyone. They just want to be by themselves. Again, that is not because the child is underconfident. That is just because the child knows who they are and what they want. The child understands that, okay, interacting with this person right now is going to be uncomfortable for me, so I don't want to do it. Children who avoid people due to actual low self-esteem, there it is not that the child doesn't want to interact. The child does want to interact. The child finds that person interesting, or the child finds that person to be safe enough, to interact with. But the child feels like, oh, what if they think ill about me? What if they think that there is something wrong with me? What if my behavior comes off as off-putting? And so the child doesn't interact. Now this happens as the child grows older, because their confidence reduces with the negative experiences that they get, right? But then when it comes to the other thing, a child who is cautious or a child who gets overstimulated very quickly, that sort of thing you will start observing at a very young age, before experiences can lower that child's self-esteem, right? That will be their temperament. That is the way they are. It's not that they are underconfident. It's not that they don't like themselves or they feel like they'll be judged. It's just that they don't want to interact with people that they are not drawn to. That's all. A very, highly introverted child, a highly extroverted child might like want to interact with everybody. They might find every person out there interesting, but there are children who don't see it that way, who don't find everyone interesting, who don't find everyone to be a safe person. And it's not because of trauma or because they don't feel good about themselves. It's just that that is how they are. That's their temperament, and that is not something we need to fix. If a child avoids people just because they know that they are overstimulated, or if a child avoids people because they don't particularly like those people, then that's not something we have to change. That is perfectly all right. But if we observe that our child is avoiding people because the child feels bad about themselves, if the child says things like, yeah, I want to talk to them, but like, what will they think? What will they think about me? If the child says things like, I wish I had friends, but then I don't know how to make friends, I don't know how to talk to people, those things might be a sign of low confidence. There we can intervene and we can teach them the skills that they may need to be able to make friends, to be able to interact with people, and to feel good about themselves. If the problem is with their self-esteem, of course, as parents and as other adults around the child, we can do things to bring up their self-esteem. But if the child is shy just because they are a cautious person by nature, that's not something to be changed. That's not something we have to make fun of them for. And if a child is like that, the worst thing we can do to them is forcing them to interact, forcing them to perform, forcing them to do these things, and making them feel like something is wrong with them. Then their confidence will actually go down and they'll start avoiding people even more. So a cautious child does not need to be fixed. Just work with their temperament, work with who they are, and they'll feel confident about themselves. And as they grow up, they'll learn the skills to be able to interact with people even when they don't really want to do it. Sometimes you have to do it when you're at work in real life. Sometimes you have to interact with people that you don't particularly like, and they will learn those skills. We can teach them those skills, but we don't have to take away that entire thing that we call shyness if it's just caution or a lower threshold for overstimulation.